Well, we're 4 minutes in. We will go ahead and begin our process for the day. Welcome to the Executive Steering Committee for the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project. Today is June 28th, and we are just a little bit after 3 o'clock. We're going to go over a few items real quickly, and Erica, if you would just begin by opening us up, would be great.
I sure will. Good afternoon. I hope everyone is staying cool today and is somewhere in a safe place, hydrated. Miss Natalie, or I'm sorry, Miss Amber, if you could go to the next slide for me, I'd appreciate it. Today, we'll hear from Chair Simpson. There will be an opportunity for public comment. We want to remind you, this is a meeting that is open to the public. It is not a public meeting, but we definitely want to leave an opportunity to hear from you, those in the community, as a part of this process. Once we complete the public comment, we will hear from our project director, Ms. Megan Channel, have a project update. And then we will dive deep into the work today with the Independent Highway Cover Assessment Team, as they will be sharing their final assessments as they're preparing to help us conclude this part of their process. After that, we will wrap up with some next steps and how we will move the process forward. So we're looking forward to that. Next slide, please. You all are pros at this. Just want to remind you, your voice matters. Dr. Holt is no stranger to you all, and he will make sure he calls on you to get all of your valued feedback in this really important community process. We ask you to speak your truth authentically. We know that you will. We ask you to listen for understanding. This is a very passionate project. It is an area in our community that many are passionate about. So we want you to listen for understanding. And when you don't quite understand, we ask you to deal with issues and not with people. Realize that all of us are committed to this work and are making an investment significantly to this work. So deal with issues, not with people. Because this is so passionate, you're going to experience some discomfort, but that's all right. We rarely grow in the midst of comfort. So we want you to embrace experiencing discomfort. And in light of that, please remain respectfully engaged. Those on the Executive Steering Committee and others who are presenting, we ask you to keep your camera on so that we can have as much of a personal dialogue as possible. And then with that, we realize there's a lot that has transpired, even in this project up to this point. We ask you to expect and accept non-closure. Dr. Holt, back to you.
Thanks, Erica. Appreciate that. We're going to go then into our next slide. Comments from the chair of the Executive Steering Committee, Mr. Simpson.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Dr. Holt. Appreciate everybody being here. Very important meeting today. Obviously, we've been working months to get to this place of findings related to the ICA work. I think it's a really big milestone that we're at. I guess I would be lying or misleading people if I were to say that we're complete here, because there's a lot of work to still unfold and unpackage as we try to move into getting to where we believe is something that is actually going to be able to foster that restorative justice impact, mobility, climate justice, all of the other bullet points that are identified, usually at the bottom of these slides, which I think are really key. Community input was the other one, as I just missed. But I do believe that there is a pathway here, and I think it's going to be able to get us to a place where we're all confident, comfortable about what is going to foster outcomes that the community needs and desires the most. I think as an ESC body, it's important that we embrace our role as an executive steering committee that's going to try to move forward a recommendation to the OTC, but to more importantly, keep at the forefront of all of our conversations and discussions that our community groups are probably the most important assets in this whole process. Despite any of our personal motivations or desires or feelings, those individuals are going to be key to us getting to a place where they feel are going to be necessary to address their greatest concerns as it relates to the history of this project and moving forward for future generations. So I would just like for folks to keep that in mind, but I'm definitely looking forward to the conversation today, Dr. Holt, and I don't want to consume any more time because I just know that there's probably going to be a lot of dialogue and I want to get to that part. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate your opening comments. And as others come into this space, it may be necessary pulling you again to help frame up and remind us of our context and the voices that are being elevated around the determinations. Gina, I was concerned when I didn't see you initially if the heat had taken you out, but I'm glad it hasn't, and I'm glad you're.
No, it seems that I'm on Charles's. I'm on Charles's link, so if somebody can tell me how to get on my own link, that would be helpful.
You could always just change your name if you want.
Can I change my name? Okay, well, maybe we'll do that for the day.
You can.
Natalie, can you fix that, or do you need to send me a separate link?
You should have a separate link recently in your inbox. You can join through that, or you can just stay on Charles's. We can have two of you on there. That should be fine.
Yeah, and I just updated your name, Gina.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Erica.
Thank you, Erica.
Wonderful. At this moment, we're going to public comment, and public comment, as you heard from Ms. Erica Warren, this is a meeting that's open to the public. It is not a public meeting. This is the meeting of the Executive Steering Committee. And I have mentioned it, she has mentioned it in various meetings, that we ask those who are making comment that you address the Executive Steering Committee, that we be thoughtful, respectful, and responsive to those who've given their time and energy to take on this work. Now, it is something that many of us in the community are concerned about, especially those of us who have Black heritage. We have a significant concern in regard to what goes on with this particular project. We invite your concern. We invite the concern and the voice of all community members. And you have many ways to express that. We ask that those who weigh in at this meeting specifically address the Executive Steering Committee. If there are other concerns beyond that, then we'd ask you to hold. So in light of that, you have 1 minute for your comment. You will be timed and then made aware of the end of your timing. So if we can go to the slide, if there are anybody in the space for public comment. Amber, did you want to describe what people need to do?
Sure. For those of you that are listening, to make a live public comment, please call 971-247-1195. The webinar ID is 849-2643-7770, and your passcode is 407290. As Dr. Holt mentioned, you'll have 1 minute to speak. And so you'll need to press *9 to raise your hand. And after Miss Natalie invites you to speak, then you'll need to press *6 to unmute yourself. At this time, I will shut down the slide so that she can identify those persons who have identified that they wish to make a public comment.
Thanks, Amber. I do see that we have one raised hand so far, so I'll go ahead and put up the 1 minute timer. Public comments today will be limited to 1 minute, consistent across our other committees. You have other options for how you may submit a public comment that are listed on the agenda. Written and verbal public comments over the phone will be shared with the committee members in advance. We had 3 for this meeting that were shared with the committee members. You should see the timer now, and I'll go ahead and begin calling on our public commenters. I see Anthony Jones is in this space. Anthony, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, hi.
My name is Anthony Jones. I am the Chair of Economic Development for the Coalition of Black Men. I also sent my comments in writing to you last week in case our internet does break up. I have outlined assessment of the Coalition of Black Men's assessment of work session open house 3. We primarily support the long-term living wage career trajectory jobs that will be created by the widening of the highway without delaying the project. We refuse to lose the opportunity to have a Black business with the right values lead the way for Black tradespeople, designers, and management professionals and businesses to have sustained work. This project, done on time, will have the best opportunity for employment. The floor is estimated at $150 million in a time when we're rebounding from COVID from our community. We want to give a couple comments on the survey. Our scenario analysis is that we've ranked the Broadway.
That is time. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
We have another commenter by the name of John. John, please unmute yourself and provide your comment now.
Good afternoon. I grew up in Northeast Portland, and while I applaud and welcome the concept of restorative justice, some of the cost estimates for this freeway caps are talking $500 million, perhaps $700 million on a transportation project that was supposed to originally cost $450 million. And my biggest concern is that people via their gas taxes, their tolling, and their car tab fees are going to end up paying for a project that has cost more for restorative justice than for transportation. I applaud the effort to restore our community, but I think the state legislature should kick in the lion's share of the added cost to this project so that the people in cars and trucks, the freight haulers, don't pay an unfair burden. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that comment, John. I'm looking and I do not see any other public commenters at this time.
Well, thank you. We're going to move forward in our meeting and we'll go to our next agenda item. Thanks so much, Mr. Jones, and thanks, John, for your comments. We value them tremendously. And thank you, Mr. Jones, also for sending your comments. And we do encourage all other community members to continue to correspond, continue to interact. Please email, you can even snail mail, send your comments in. We want to hear from you. This is part of the process. It's transparent decision-making is capturing the voice of the community, those who are in the space, those who make up the various committees, as well as those who participated in the independent cover assessment process, and then others as well. And so really want to emphasize your voice matters, and we appreciate it. Our next item is our project update. And so we go to our director, go to the director of the project for Oregon Department of Transportation, Ms. Megan Chow.
Thank you, Dr. Holt, and good afternoon, Executive Steering Committee. First and foremost, I just want to reiterate the points made by Chair Simpson and just thanking the independent cover assessment team for all of the work and really the creativity and the visioning and helping us develop the highway cover design options and really bringing the community vision to the forefront. And then even more importantly, I want to just express appreciation for all of the work from each of you as the Executive Steering Committee, as well as our members of the COAC, our Community Opportunity Advisory Committee, the HAB, Historic Albina Advisory Board, and the tremendous amount of Black leaders that also contributed towards this community vision. So as you heard from Chair Simpson, today is not the final decision on the highway covers. We need to make sure that we're getting this right and be sure that the community and the Historic Albina Advisory Board and have the time that they need to weigh in on this decision as well. So today, the independent cover assessment team will be reflecting your feedback and the broader community feedback and reflecting that into their final CAP report that they're preparing and finalizing next month. So the Executive Steering Committee is not being asked to make a final decision on the covers today. This is really a point in time in which we're reflecting the priorities for incorporation into the independent cover assessment team's final report. So I am looking forward to seeing this presentation this afternoon. As the IC team is separate from ODOT, we're here learning live with you. And so looking forward to seeing it. As a next step, and as ODOT, we will take the range of the design concepts for the highway covers and really do that technical deep dive at the concepts to better understand the opportunities, the trade-offs, feasibility for the implementation. So it's our responsibility to make sure that we can and take the next steps necessary to implement ultimately the design that you are choosing. And as we're paving that path forward for a future decision on the highway cover use, and really to provide an opportunity to address all the technical details, we are developing a plan for a series of additional joint meetings. I know we've heard that request from the Executive Steering Committee along the way. So we'll be working on calendaring those joint meetings. And here in those meetings, we'll be able to do that deeper dive into the concept designs provided by the independent cover team and work together to better understand those technical elements. So today's meeting will include a draft resolution for consideration, really intended to inform the ICA's final report, identifying the ESC's priorities, and then using that report to inform the future conversations ahead. And as Chair Simpson mentioned, we may be at the finish line with the independent cover assessment team's work, but we're by no means at the finish line for this decision. And there's still a number of community conversations to take place. So I think what's most important is that we get this right. We have a significant opportunity in front of us. And so we're gonna do that work, the due diligence, and bringing forth information to respond to questions that you've asked for your final recommendation, and then before the OTC makes their final decision. So with that, looking forward to the presentation tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. And Amber, you're going to give us an update from the Community Oversight Advisory Committee.
Sure, just really quick, just so you can see my face as well. So we had a meeting with the COAC just a few weeks ago around the technical assistance. That really kind of summed up all of the work with the COAC and the CMGC as it relates to the DBE and the subcontracting plan. They will be finished modifying aspects of that portion of the diversity plan. And then in a couple of weeks flown by, July 15th, we will be starting the discussion around workforce. And then we have several meetings around workforce where the COAC will be weighing in on that. And so we look forward to having, as Megan said, some joint meetings with the COAC as well as the other members here. And soon I will give you more updates. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the Executive Steering Committee for either Director Channel or for Amber? Santa Barros. All right. We will move on then to our next item, which is the independent cover assessment team. You will have your time to lead us in our process this afternoon. I believe I'm handing it off to you, Gina. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed the HAB update. My apologies. Erica, please.
I'll be brief since many of you were in the meeting with us last week on the 22nd. We really did have a good discussion on the HAB's priorities with great discussion and input from the Executive Steering Committee members who were able to join us. Similar to today, the HAB reviewed the independent cover assessment's final scenario report. They took a deeper dive into some of their priorities, even in regards to building height, et cetera, regarding the covers and feasibility for that. Have discussed a desire for outcomes that maximize developable land, which is what we've been talking about, as well as long-lasting community benefit, providing space for ownership, as well as maximizing jobs and economic opportunities for Black and Brown contractors, moving the project forward with that work benefiting economic justice for the albino community. So thank you to those of you who participated with us last week. As Director Channel mentioned, we'll have many opportunities to engage with you in the near future. Thanks, Dr. Holt.
Well, thank you. And good capture, because that was a significant meeting, a great opportunity for the Executive Steering Committee and the Historic Albino Advisory Board to have some dialogue together. We've been so close in all of this work, things are almost beginning to run into each other. So with that being stated, any questions for Ms. Erica? All right, Ms. Gina, it is in your hands.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holt. Good afternoon, Executive Steering Committee members. We are excited to be here at the end of this process with you and to kind of share what we've learned and what we've heard and where we've landed. So I want to start with just a quick review of our agenda. Next slide, please. So we didn't get the more detailed slide. We will be going over each of our areas and then giving time for discussion in each of our content areas. So next slide, please. So first of all, what I'd like to do is I would really like to have Nolan set the stage and kind of remind us all of what the scope of our work was and, you know, sort of where we've landed and then how we'll be moving forward from here. So with that, please pick it up, Nolan.
Thanks, Gina. So you've seen this flow chart so many times, and we're getting close to the right side of the page finally. It does feel like it's gone by quickly, but just as a recap, since we first met with you in the fall of 2020, we've had 3 work sessions, and over the course of those work sessions, we spent the first one really listening to you, to the HAB, and to our community workshop participants to understand what their community vision would be and aspirations. We used that feedback to generate a number of physical design ideas and scenarios. We presented preliminary scenarios in work session 2 and gathered feedback again from all those groups as well as online survey participants. That feedback was then used to refine, improve, understand better the nature of those scenarios and potential hybrids that may be able to be created to address additional hope streams, aspirations, or concerns. And then those were presented in work session 3. And then we received more feedback about those that has influenced the final report that you all received at the end of the day, Friday. So where we are now is that we have prepared that draft final report. We will walk through some of the findings with you this evening. Those findings are a combination of reflections on the feedback that we've received, the inputs we've received, and our technical analysis and understanding. Want to give a particular appreciation to ODOT and their consultants, TriMet and Metro and their staff, a lot of whom leaned in and gave us good feedback, which has influenced these findings. We have also prepared, as Megan mentioned, a series of resolutions, draft resolutions, which are intended not to be our recommendations necessarily, but actions that could be taken to help secure or at least create a path toward the kinds of outcomes that we heard were desirable to community members and the participants in the committees that Alando mentioned. So we're presenting those for your consideration. We'll have time. We have a lot of time on the agenda today, and the intent is that you can ask us questions about the findings, and we'll have our technical experts available for you to do that. and give us any feedback that you may have about the resolutions or actions that maybe end up being recommendations from the ESC to the Oregon Transportation Commission at whatever time that will occur. So that's where we're at in the process. Happy to take any questions and pause for that.
Thank you so much, Nolan. Appreciate it. If you'll go to the next slide. So just leading into our findings and draft resolutions, I just want to give everyone kind of a quick overview of our work session 3, what was involved. And before I actually step into work session 3, I kind of would like to summarize where we have been in our outreach and our engagement process. We've actually had 3 work sessions. We've involved in each of those work sessions. We've had 2 community workshop sessions. We've had an abbreviated workshop with the HAB, an abbreviated workshop with ESC, and then we've had an online open house survey as part of each of those work sessions. We've actually engaged with, in our workshops with 53 individuals that have participated. Our workshops have been, when we originally did the outreach, we outreached to over 150 organizations, community organizations, and we had a broad cross-section of youth, adults, community organizations, churches, and businesses from the Black historic community who participated in those workshops. So of that 53, 45 of those individuals were from the historic community. And then we've had over almost 1,400 individuals participate through the 3 online open houses. And about 17% of those participants were of the 340. So we had 1,400 who visited the website, and actually 340 people who filled out the surveys in the 3 work sessions. And of those, about 17% were Black, and about 12.5% were BIPOC. So, and then of course we've had important work sessions with each of, with you and with the HAB throughout this process. So in work session 3 specifically, we had, the feedback from those work sessions was that nearly all of the Black historic albino community workshop participants and about half of the HAB participants ranked scenarios 4 or 5 as their preferred highway scenario in the live poll. Scenario 1 was ranked the lowest by the majority of, or the least preferred by the majority of Black historic albino community participants and by HAB members in the ICA's engagement process, and was ranked the highest by the majority of the, Scenario 1 was ranked, however, Scenario 1 was ranked the highest by the majority of the 6 ESC members who participated in work session 3 live poll. So we did have a split in that feedback. Next slide, please. On the hybrid scenarios, as you may recall, in our work session, we asked both the HAB and the ESC, and of course in the workshops and our online, we asked people to rank the hybrids in order, if there couldn't be agreement that was reached on a specific scenario. And community workshop participants preferred hybrid 3, which moves the south freeway ramps south of the cover. It's really a variation on concept 5. The HAB members preferred hybrid 2, which moves the highway freeway ramp south of the cover, and it's really a variation on scenario 4. And hybrid 1 was preferred by the ESC members who participated in the work session live poll. Those are the ESC members that were present. Not all members present in the abbreviated workshop on the 7th actually participated in the poll. And then nearly all of our community workshop participants strongly supported the creation of a new governance entity to ensure the development of the highway covers, and about a third of the HAB members supported this action, with another third being neutral and another third that did not support it in the HAB. And then 3 of the ESC members were neutral, 2 supported it, and one did not support it, of the 6 HAB ESC members that participated in the live poll. Next. So with that, those are sort of the results from the community engagement results from our final work session 3. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kate White and let her give you some context for our findings and resolutions.
Great. Thanks, Gina. Thanks so much. And pleased to be here with you all. Thank you to the Executive Steering Committee for your interest, your service, your patience with us over the last many months. I've spoken to you before, but I'm Kate. I'm Kate White. I'm the technical lead for the independent cover assessment, and appreciate your attention as we're bringing forward our final findings here. So before we get to our findings, I have just a couple slides that's a bit of context to keep in mind while you're considering these findings and potential resolutions. And it's basically, these couple slides are really some background context so that you can understand sort of the constraints within which we were working and trying to do our analysis. So, so I wanted to start with these 3. First of all, the base case, the Rose Quarter Improvement Project design, the environmental assessment approved project. There will need to be design changes any which way. ODOT needs to get approval by Federal Highway and the City of Portland for permits. So just wanted to be clear on that before we get to our scenarios. Just the base case Rose Quarter Improvement Project will need to get some additional approvals. Secondly, there's been a lot of concern, of course, about construction schedule. And we just wanted to share that we feel like the current proposed construction schedule does not account for some significant political risks that could delay the schedule. And namely that there's critical public partners that are not at the table that really need to be, per my last point. And thirdly, on the estimated costs for the whole project, we spent a lot of time doing estimated cost estimatings for the 3 scenarios that we studied more in depth. But we struggled a bit because the latest cost estimate for the proposed Rose Quarter Improvement Project is out of the January 2020 cost to complete report from ODOT. And it's based on the 15% design, and there's definitely been changes since then. So we don't have exactly apples to apples, but we did the best job we could with the information we had, and we'll be sharing that with you, and we have shared that with you. And then finally, just a couple more background considerations for you. One, that the House Bill 2017 on terms of how is this project going to be funded overall, House Bill 2017 allocated $30 million annually for the Rose Quarter Improvement Project, including the highway covers, beginning in 2022. But this is not enough to cover the whole project. And the gap, because we don't have the latest estimate, the gap is unknown. And the Rose Quarter Improvement Project absolutely is going to need to attract additional funding to move forward on the timeline that they're looking at. And then finally, I know there's a huge amount of focus and concern about the DBE contracting construction jobs. Without a complete adopted diversity plan and a project schedule, more detailed project schedule, we found it was really impossible to accurately estimate the time frame over which those jobs and other local economic benefits will be delivered to the community. So there's a limitation in what we were able to analyze in terms of that. All that said, we hope that you will find our findings helpful to move forward and be part of a pathway to really start to bridge some of these gaps and consider our highway cover recommendations, so the project can move forward, on time, on budget, attract new funding, get other project partners on board, etc. So with that, the next slide is starting to summarize our findings. So I'll turn it back to my teammates.
Actually, Kate, I think you were gonna. Okay, go ahead, Kate Brooks.
I wanted to just pause for a moment and acknowledge that Jana has her hand up, and I wasn't sure if we wanted to pause or Gina, if you want to keep going. Gina, you're on mute.
I think we should pause here and allow for a little bit of deliberation on the.
I think if Jana has a quick question, we should take it. We will be discussing all of these things in the context of our resolutions. But if you have a clarifying question you need to ask, Jana, please do.
Actually, I have a clarifying statement.
Okay.
And that is the statement about the $30 million that was dedicated to the Rose Quarter project in House Bill 2017 was always, just so that everybody understands clearly, that was always just designed as the baseline funding that would have been bonded. So it was worth a lot more than $30 million. So I just wanted clarity there. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that clarification. All right, Kate Brooks, please take it away.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be with you again. Again, I'm Kate Brooks, a project urban designer with CGF. And I'm going to walk you through a few things. But first, we want to say that with all of this work that we've done, we've really narrowed our findings down into sort of three critical areas that are the community vision and neighborhood framework, the design scenarios and elements, and governance. So we are going to start with the community vision and neighborhood framework. In this process, we really have heard consistent feedback from our work session 1 that there was really 10 top program priorities for the development on these covers. And that is something that we've shared with you multiple times. The other findings for our community vision was that the community workshops in particular really consistently expressed their top priority was land. And it wasn't just, acreage and number of square feet. It was high quality land for development that really could be for the Black community to, develop and own. And, I think at one point in our community meetings, we heard a community member say, if you don't own it, you don't have wealth creation. So that was a really big component of that. Another really big finding that we had and heard consistently is that there were some community members that are really, their top priority was jobs and contracting opportunities for the Black community. And they really disfavored scenarios that might create schedule risk for those jobs. So those were really the top findings from our community vision work sessions. So, as we worked forward into work sessions 1 and 2, we created what we're calling principles of a neighborhood framework to really provide the basis, the foundation for the design goals for restorative justice on these covers. So the 4 principles that we arrived at were to maximize high quality development parcels on and around the cover, to provide flexibility on these covers for future development. So designing them for both buildings and gathering space, to restore the streets across the highway, to create more active frontages for development, and to prioritize safer pedestrian-oriented routes, and to minimize the highway's noise and pollution exposure. So, you guys have seen this before. This is just one example that we've shared with you for how those program priorities can sort of come to fruition on the cover and around the cover. And we showed a few examples here. Create gathering spaces, create larger development sites off the cover, maybe smaller development sites on the cover. Those can be for Black businesses and housing. Create an upgraded street network that supports multimodal transportation systems, providing street parking and upgrading the sidewalks to be wider, to have nice plantings for activities and pedestrians to support those Black businesses. So again, this is just one way that we've looked at how these priorities can be explored. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Nolan, and he's going to walk you through the neighborhood framework draft resolution.
Thanks, Kate. So for each slide of findings that we will have an associated draft resolution. And as I mentioned, these are intended and were created to be your resolutions. And so while we have done the best job that we can with what we've heard and with our professional expertise to prepare some actions that we think would be effective ways of serving the community vision, ultimately they don't mean anything if you don't adopt them or send them on to the OTC. And so really they need your feedback and ultimately approval to mean anything. So what we have is we have some statements here, and I'll read them. And then we have, I think, what is a good amount of time for people to discuss. And in fact, before we even do that, it might make sense to pause and just see if anyone has questions about the findings before we even go to the resolution. So sorry to get ahead of ourselves.
Do any of the ESC members have any questions about the findings around the community vision and neighborhood framework? And
if people prefer, we could read through the resolutions and then take general conversation about both the findings and the resolution together if that feels okay.
I think let's proceed in that way.
Okay, so the draft resolution is whereas the Rose Quarter Improvement Project should respond to the community vision and neighborhood framework developed through the ICA engagement process, the ESC adopts the community vision and neighborhood framework into the project values and outcomes and prioritizes the community's goals for a restored neighborhood on and around the highway covers. And the ESC recommends that ODOT work with the governing entity, which will be described in a separate section, to develop a land disposition plan focused on identifying and confirming the amount of development rights on the highway covers, the amount of developable land to be acquired by ODOT during the Rose Quarter Improvement Project construction, free from constraints on disposition that may be eligible for future conveyance to the governance entity for community-focused development, with the shared goal of maximizing the amount of area to be conveyed to the governing entity. So this is intended to be one idea with a couple parts, and we can open it up for questions, comments, conversation, suggested changes, any of those things.
Are there any of the ESC members that would like to provide feedback on this? Agree, disagree, questions about the resolutions or the findings? Difference of opinion? Okay, I see Nate, and let's start with Nate. Nate, your hands, please. Nate McCoy.
Yep, thank you, Gina, and thank you, Nolan and team. I guess for me, and I only want to speak for myself, I appreciate you guys putting some draft resolution language together. I know we can use a little bit of time today, but to me, it seems like if we're going to try to get this thing done right, we'll probably need more time than just today. And certainly we don't have all of our ESC members represented today as well. So I'm just hoping that even with this conversation today, that some of this can still happen after the fact. I mean, I know it sounds like you guys might be wrapping up your role, but I just would want to make sure, and so I'm seeing some heads nod, but I certainly want to weigh in, but I didn't come prepared enough today because I had a meeting right before this to be able to even check notes that I know I wouldn't be comfortable, if we were trying to say that this language is the language and suggest that. So I would just love more time is, I guess, my comment.
Thank you, Nate. I appreciate your comments. And based on Chair Simpson's and Megan's comments, I think there's going to be additional opportunity to weigh in on this, and certainly our work is going to be hopefully carried forward as a base to jump off of for that work. So I'm sure there will be additional opportunities, but any feedback that you would have for us related to how these are crafted, we'd like to hear those today, because we will be refining potentially some of this, some of these things in our final report. And part of what we're hoping to do today is to hear back from you what resonates, what doesn't resonate, or how we could fine tune these resolutions so they would feel like they belong, that they're your resolutions, that they're more in line with your thinking. So,
yep. And one thing I will give you concretely, Gina, is the opening statement to me almost seems like the only thing community should be looking at is what this ICA team put together. And while it's great information, it's not the only information available. So I would think it would be good to not wordsmith it so targeted to just that reporting is kind of what's guiding these new discussions, but certainly part of that. Clearly you guys did some meaningful work, but I just don't want anybody to be misled that that would be the only work that people are looking at, because there's plenty more documents, and I'm starting to get from many sources that just suggest that we still have a lot more information to disseminate in the community. So I think it is absolutely needed, but I think it would be good to say it in a different way than the way it's open.
So Bryson, please, your hand was up next.
Yeah, so with regard to this first question, I think if we go with the governing entity idea, I think that something along the lines of the second option is going to be the direction we're going to want to go in, because when you're looking at governing entities like that, the things that they need to have support from the community and then kind of continued governmental support is that commitment up front from the partner agencies that they will continue to kind of see the project through. And I think if we're gonna try to stand up some sort of recommend that we go that route, I think we're going to need to also have that with a commitment, with that visual commitment. Otherwise, I think we might end up, creating something that's set up to fail.
Appreciate it, Bryson. Thank you. President Peterson, I saw your hand up, but it came down. Do you have anything that you want to speak to here, or?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just a little confused. So are we only looking at this first part of this draft resolution, or is there another place to make comments?
So for each section, this one is vision and neighborhood framework. The next one will be about scenarios and elements. There's one about governance. So I think there's 5 or 6 resolutions in total. Each one is topical, and this one has, an opening statement and 2 parts to it. So
Okay.
Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. I'll wait till the end, and apologies for not being on camera, but I am on vacation in Eastern Oregon in the hills with a weak signal and camper here. So thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us.
We're glad you're on.
Yes, absolutely. So do we have any other comments, suggestions for the ICA team, feedback related to the community vision and framework findings and resolutions? All right, seeing none, I think we can move on to the design. Kate, I think we're back with you.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. So we have a couple of sort of subjects within the scenarios and elements. I'm going to start with the design findings. And again, these are a summary of each scenario. So scenario 1, due to the ramps intersecting the streets and blocks on and around the highway covers, provides the least amount of high quality development area. But because it's generally consistent with the EA, it has the least risk of schedule delay. Scenario 4 provides the most amount of high quality development area due to the ramps being relocated. So if you see on the bottom of your on the bottom of the screen in the thumbnail, you can see kind of the scenario designs. Scenario 4 proposes to move both the northbound and southbound ramps. But with this reconfiguration of streets, so both the ramps and the merge of Flint and Vancouver, there will be some transit delays. We are estimating them as less than 20 seconds. And because it's not consistent with the EA configuration, we are assessing that it has a moderate to high risk of schedule delay. Right now, our estimate is at 14 to 24 months. Scenario 5 similarly has proposed to move both ramps to the south. And it also proposes to restore the grid with Flint and Hancock extensions. This has also a large amount of high quality development area, not as much as 4, but more than 1. Again, with this street reconfiguration, there will be some transit delays. Again, we're estimating less than 20 seconds. And it also has a high to moderate risk of schedule delay at an estimate of 14 to 24 months. With our development assessment framework process, we evaluated that scenario 5 is scored the highest and creates the greatest potential for these desired community outcomes on the covers. You also may recall that we looked at elements to explore ways to create hybrid scenarios. And our findings for those were that element F, which is just the move of the southbound ramps, does increase the area on the covers because we've removed that ramp. And it has less cost impact than moving element G, which is the northbound ramps. This is estimated at a moderate risk of schedule delay at 14 to 24 months. And moving elements F and G, so 9.
Kate, you've frozen.
And
Kate,
restored
you're breaking
areas.
up.
Kate, you've frozen. Can you start over on this last bullet, please?
Okay. Are you guys hearing?
Nope. You might want to turn off your video. Yeah, just turn off your video. That'll help.
How's that?
Better.
Better.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think it's heat related. Let's blame the heat. Okay, where did you guys lose me at F?
The last bullet, just read.
Okay.
The last bullet, please.
I'm sorry. So yeah, elements F and G combined create the most amount of land on the covers and the most amount of continuous multimodal access. And it will, however, have the highest risk of schedule delay. And I think we're leaning toward that 24 months for this option. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Nolan for the resolution.
So for this resolution, we have, whereas scenario 5 scored highest in the development assessment framework and its ability to serve community vision and restorative justice criteria, the and in this case, there are 2 potential scenario recommendations. One is ESC recommended adoption and inclusion of the conceptual ICA design elements C, F, and G into the Rose Quarter Improvement Project design consistent with scenario 5, or because it scored the highest among the hybrids, ESC recommends adoption and inclusion of conceptual ICA design elements C and F into the Rose Quarter improvement design consistent with hybrid 3. And these, because they did score the highest in our development assessment framework, they made it onto this slide, but certainly it's not intended to constrain the options that the ESC could advance to the Oregon Transportation Commission.
So before we ask for reaction, let's just remind people what element C, Kate just went over element F, but let's just
go back one slide
and say it again. So we don't have element C. Kate, maybe you can just show people what element C, F, and G are again, so people will understand it in the context of the resolution, please.
Sure. So scenario 5 contains elements C, F, and G. Element C is the Flint connection and the Hancock connection to be restored across the highway. F, as I just explained, is the southbound ramps moving, and G is the northbound ramps moving. So scenario 5 has these 3 elements, and hybrid 3 has just C and F.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. So we want to stop here and take any questions or comments or feedback from ESC members. So if you would raise your hand, we'd be happy to hear from you. All right, President Peterson.
I just want to make it clear that I will not be weighing in on any of these unless questions arise, because the Metro Council has not gone through all of this information yet and provided direction. Also, we haven't been able to get to them any kind of recommendation from the HAB. So we are waiting and working with the council to educate them on the entirety of this process and the trade-offs. So just FYI, that's why I'm not asking anything other than clarifying questions.
Perfect. Thank you for that comment. Brendan, I think you were next.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. Wait, am I double? All right. I always have to put the box to light up to know that I'm not double muted. Well, thanks. And I guess I want to also just, because I haven't been able to say it yet here on the record, just I thank you all personally on the ICA team, but wanted to do it here in a public spot. Just incredible work. But with that, to get back to what we're dealing with right now, one of the things I flagged for the ICA team, and I've mentioned it, I think, in our last meeting, is just some of the concern that I have that we have around Madrona Studios and moving the ramps to the south and the impacts there. I know not all the information has been made available yet, and I appreciate the team kind of walking through with me where they think those impacts are now. As folks know, it's an EJ facility focusing on helping some of those most vulnerable in our community. And I just want to let our A&E team, our architectural engineering team, know that I'm going to be all over this. So I'm going to need a lot of answers to a lot of questions about this. I hear that the columns are going to be within 6 feet of the building. I want to know exactly how that impacts that facility and the folks and the residents within that facility and its operations. Because I think, Chair Simpson, when you first asked, when we had our first meeting, you said to all of us, what is your definition of restorative justice? And I'll paraphrase what I think I said at that point, which is we are not going to repeat the mistakes that we have made in the past. We're not going to repeat that 1950s and 1960s approach to public works projects that had such negative impacts on so many people in our communities. And so we're not going to do that with this project. And I just want to flag that right now. I'm going to be all over it. And I'm really going to have get a lot of answers around Madrona Studios and the impacts that we're going to have on that, because we're not going to do that anymore. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks, Gina. that concern, and it's duly noted, Brendan. Do you have anything you want to say, Nolan, before I move on to Bryson related to that?
Nope. We've heard that message, and we'll document that concern if we haven't already, and we'll move on to Bryson.
All right, Bryson, you were next, and after Bryson, it'll be Nate. Okay, so please, Bryson, you're.
Yeah, so because the schedule delay component is a big piece in weighing these two pieces, and then weighing basically the movement of the ramps at all as elements. And one of the things that kind of impacts that analysis is how much money is going to Black community, Black-owned businesses, is committed to those groups as part of the project already. And so I think I've heard several different numbers, and I think even Tony Jones mentioned 150 million in his public comment. But if I could get a number from ODOT as to how much of this project is going to DBE contractors and how much of this project is going to Black-owned contractors, so that we can have an idea of the sort of scale that any delay would, the scale of the amount of work that any delay would have.
Thank you. I think that was kind of directed at ODOT in terms of maybe that's something as an ESC member you would like to see, and we'll note that as well.
Yeah, and Bryson, I guess I know Amber's with us, and she is our DBE and workforce lead on the project. She might be able to even directly answer that right now, just very quickly, in terms of the dollar amount dedicated for DBEs.
So right now at 20% design, the estimated figure is between 145 to $175 million.
And is that for all DBEs, or is that for Black contractors, or how does that can you break that down even further?
Yeah, so right now we're at 20% design. The actual hard goal will be set at 60%. So if you think of it that way, we're like right here. In terms of the proportion of work that goes to Black contractors, we don't know that yet, because we're not at 60%. And the other thing is that's not the way the goal is set. But the JV has a track record of utilizing a high proportion of the overall goal to minority contractors. So I can't give you a firm number, because one, we're in pre-construction, and two, that's not the way it's calculated.
So will there be a point where you'd be able to provide more of a breakdown? I guess DBE contractors are a fairly broad category. And I think when we're thinking about the impact of this particular project, we've got kind of a more narrower community that we're focused on impacting, other than just the broad category of DBEs. And I'm kind of curious as to whether or not there's going to be a point in which that would be able to be broken down, at least not even necessarily in a specific number, but in enough to kind of give us scale, so that we can say, oh, okay, we're looking at this, and $150 million are going to Black-owned businesses as part of the construction. Delaying that will have X impact. Or we're looking at it and saying, oh, it's looking more like 20 to 30 million is going.
Yeah,
yeah. That makes a big difference here.
Oh yeah, I completely agree, and I know both the JV and the ODOT feel the same. So in terms of that, we'll have a better sense once we have a better sense of the scope of work. That's why as we get closer to 60%, and then the JV starts developing, conducting outreach and actually making commitments, then we will have a better sense of the overall proportion of work that will be utilized by Black-owned firms. But we're just too early on in pre-construction at this phase for me to really provide solid answers to that question. I'm sorry, sir.
So I guess then what I'm hearing is we're not going to get to a point where we've got a good idea of how much of these dollars are going to go towards Black-owned businesses before we get to the recommendation stage. And that's what it sounded like.
Well, I mean, the majority of which the JV has indicated that they wish to utilize Black-owned firms, but you want an exact dollar amount, and I can't give you one at this time.
Can we leave it there, Bryson?
I think it's
No, actually, can I
to-
follow? I'm sorry, Bryson, can I follow up? This is Lynn. Amber, where does the $100 million number come from that we have heard so much about in testimony? Can you put that in context for us?
So, I mean, I would need to know who is providing the testimony. I mean, it's the community is like identifying the dollar amount, which is it's the range. So I can't provide an answer to that because I don't know. I don't know the context in which you're pointing to.
Amber, I'm going to jump in real quick because I see where this is headed, and this isn't a litigation. I think the main key here is if we want to get to the nuts and bolts of the dollars, we're going to need to do that with real estate as well. And I don't think we have enough information at our disposal right now to get that detailed and granular of information, whether from specific construction outputs to specific real estate and restorative justice outputs, because there's legalities that protect that. Otherwise, these things would have happened historically. So I think right now it's a big gray and ambiguous thing, but obviously that's what the process is for, so we can try to get as much of the information we possibly can. But I would attest that none of us can really figure out how much is going to go into the Black community, because no one is really going to know specifically how legally you can do that.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I would like to also say, President Peterson, because you do know I am a Title VI expert, in which case some of the other scenarios that have provided also have Title VI issues with those as well, with regard to whether or not you can create some of these other restorative justice opportunities for Black-owned businesses. So that as well has to be discussed by ODOT as well as yourself, and whether or not you can back into that outcome. So I just raise that for your consideration. Also, speaking to the point that Commissioner Simpson just raised.
I really appreciate that, because I'm an engineer, not a lawyer. So none of what I was asking was about litigation. But however, Amber, thank you so much. I guess any insight that you can provide, is it that the type of work on those other scenarios, we don't have certified DBEs, or what's the reason for that? Thanks.
No, I was referring to some of the previous slides that Ms. Woolley and the ICA have provided, because technically under the federal law for which governs this program, they also, those same laws apply to that as well. And so with regard to whether or not they can actually do some of those scenarios, there would have to be a determination of how you can actually achieve those methodologies, given that that federal law precludes you from doing it.
Thank you.
So could I interject here? We have a lot more ground to cover, and I don't want us to sort of get, I think, as is true of many aspects of this project, there are gray areas. We all have experienced those gray areas, and probably all of those questions are not going to be fully understood before people are having to sort of make their best estimates of what they think this project can deliver. So I'm going to take Nate's comment, and then I'd like to move on if we could. Bryson, are you okay with that? Or
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just gonna kind of support the, we've got gray areas. We just need to flush out
Yeah.
the things that we already do know and have a good idea to make sure
Yes.
we've got things on the table.
And so if Nate, I thought we can take a quick comment, not to take the discussion we just had further into.
I'm gonna leave it alone, Gina. I'm gonna leave it alone because I have plenty of answers to that question, but I'll leave that one alone for another day.
Yeah, I think it's a question that's going to have to be further pursued with ESC members relative to, the information you feel like you need in order to weigh the benefits. So with that, I would like to move us to the next.
Well, hold on, Gina. I didn't get a chance to ask my question.
Oh, okay, please.
It wasn't even pertaining to that. I just was telling you I wasn't going to respond to that.
Got it. I apologize. I thought you were saying you would leave it alone. So go ahead,
Yep.
Nate.
Please. Well, no, I don't want to leave this alone because I'm actually getting some real facts out of our federal government, fresh off the press of the Executive Office of the President, Council of Environmental Quality, which, we've sat in these meetings many times and, not to say that, people's approximations don't count, but when we hear things like, delays of 6 to 18 months, delays of 14 to 24 months, and it seems like it's changed. We finally took it upon ourselves as a national organization that is housed in Washington, D.C., from blocks away from the White House to get our own information. And it's just interesting to find that something I'll share with this ESC committee, if they so choose to see it, is that nationally, we're already finding that we haven't been told the truth. And this is my issue with when we have committees, is that community doesn't always get the real facts. And I'm not saying that the ICA team did not give facts or any of those things, but when we receive a letter that says nationally, when you start to look at an EA that might shift, because nobody here can answer if this EA with all these options may or may not shift something to an EIS, on average across the nation, people are waiting 3.5 years. And this is across the nation everywhere. And so the fact that we're having these conversations, but people are making somewhat uninformed decisions that would have actually longer delays just does not seem appropriate for us to conclude that one option is better than other options and that we're giving assumptions on the impact and the costs. And to me, that just, no fault against ICA. We just don't have enough of the facts. And I think I'm going to start sharing some of this document that we've received of last week that clearly show across the nation, you're looking at a 3 to 5 year delay, period. And so I'm just saying, I would love for everybody to kind of see this, hear that, and actually let that be a part of the record, if you will, because this is stuff that I remember when I did NEPA reviews for the city of Portland. Public comment can slow a process down very quickly. And I know there would be many that would have additional public comment here. And I think it would be to the detriment of the project. So I just bring that up, Gina, because again, nothing that the ICA team, I think, has done wrong at all, other than, somehow we weren't getting these federal documents to show that some of this stuff is really happening in real time, and taking a lot longer than what we're talking about in these meetings. So I will share that with Stephen Holt, and then maybe that's a document of record we can discuss and, put some teeth into. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Nolan, do you have any follow-up or anything?
Nope.
Okay. We would welcome seeing it as well, Nate. Our team, if you would share it with us, we would be happy to look at it so we can make sure that we're on the same page in terms of what it is you asked and what kind of a response you got and what we have done independently in terms of research about a path forward related to the environmental assessment reevaluations. Okay.
Yep, absolutely, Gina. It's a public document, so I'll feel free in sharing it with everybody.
Great. I'm going to speak in a couple slides about the environmental implications. Nate, can I just clarify something that you said? I think did you say that a shift to an EIS would be 3.5 years or something?
Well, no, I was saying that if, again, we're at an EA stance, but if stuff is subject to impacting community even further, which moving bridges and, and reorienting the grid, I would think might suggest that we need to move to EIS. Again, I'm not the czar of that, but I do remember my days of if there was an adverse impact, you absolutely had to move towards that if you were doing a lot of new things that weren't always agreed to in the beginning. So all I'm saying is that if that did happen and we can't answer that question today, clearly we need to look at what an EIS impact could be. And that's what I'm hearing is this document says it's been a 3.5 year wait for an EIS to get through its full process from an NOI, which is a notice of intent, to a record of decision, which is the ROD, which everybody here who does these things knows what I'm talking about. So just wanted to share that because, again, that's information I never got through our channels, and I just want to make sure that information is on the record.
Okay, thank you so much. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But just to be really clear, we want to avoid an EIS. we have no recommendations to that effect. So.
Yep, no, I'm with you, Kate. Again, it could happen. I don't think anybody here could say it couldn't happen. So that's all I'm saying is we just need to be prepared.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Jana, you have your hand up. I presume it's related to this content. So if it is, please.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
And mostly because I want to build off of what Nate is bringing up here today. And I was originally going to wait till we'd gone through the other elements, but we're on this topic of time delay. And I guess my question to you all is, has that been part of the risk of adding this delay? Has that risk assessment been part of the calculation for the recommendation you're making? And the reason I bring that up is because you've kind of obviously are clearly promoting scenario 5 and even possibly even scenario 4, but not option number 1, which has the least amount of delay involved with it. And in this current political climate, there were efforts this legislative session to put restrictions on this project and to send it back to the drawing board and starting over. And those did not move forward. But that's not to say those won't come back. The longer we delay, the more opportunity there is to stop any kind of improvement in the Rose Quarter. And not only would it affect the work on the covers and the ability to have that project built, but it would affect what we're going after, and that is to fix one of the nation's top bottlenecks. We wouldn't be able to do either one of those. So I think we need to really seriously consider the cost of delay and the risk associated with that. And I want to emphasize again what Nate brought up. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Jen. Appreciate it. All right. Any other feedback for us or comments to us about this area of our findings and our draft resolution? Then Kate, I think
it looks like Julia has her hand up.
Julia, go ahead.
And Gina, you can tell me whether this, I can slot this in somewhere else because I'm not sure quite where it fits, but I wanted to just, I guess, elevate the questions I had asked offline about the air quality. You can tell me there's another place naturally it fits better, but I'd just like to get that into the mix at some point. Is this the time that I should?
No, we actually have a whole section of environmental findings, and that would be the very appropriate place to slot your comments in.
Great. I will wait till that moment in time.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your accommodation. All right, with that, I think we can move to the next section, and I believe this is Kate White.
Yeah, thank you, Gina. So I'm going to report in on our technical and cost estimate findings. You've seen probably a lot of this before in the last few meetings, but just to summarize our findings on the technical and cost side of things. So we looked at on the 3 scenarios that we did cost estimates for those 3. And the range was around $819 to $998 million in total construction costs. Not a big variance between the three, but about a 10% variance. If, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars it's a lot of money, but it's not a huge range between the three scenarios. And in terms of what kind of development the scenarios would support, because that's been a lot of interest, you know, how tall can these buildings get on top of the covers? So we assumed for our three scenarios that we could easily support, and we looked at the structural issues, two-story buildings, no problem. If you're going to get up to 5 stories, there would be an additional cost of about 172 to 193 million. That's based on the foundation, additional foundation support that would be needed to support those 5-story buildings. And then to get up taller than that, over 5 stories, it's possible within specific areas to do that, but it would mean not having as wide a width of the highway, because once you're trying to cover such a wide highway, it's hard to structurally get taller buildings. And then on the width of the highway cover, on the width of the highway cover, the highway, we based our scenarios, you know, ODOT said, you know, assume the full width for your scenarios, which is, you know, the travel lanes, the shoulders, including a, you know, 24-foot egress pathway underneath in the tunnel under the covers. But as your independent assessor, I just wanted to make sure everyone, the executive steering committee, is aware that we looked at national examples, and this is a very wide tunnel. It's not customary for urban areas. And so we really think there's opportunities to look again at the width of the highway and the shoulders, to take a more performance-based or context-sensitive approach that could reduce costs, improve the ramps, reduce the right-of-way take, improve the community development potential. As I said, you might be able to get taller buildings. And we started just in the last couple of weeks, because there's been such interest in this, at what does that actually mean in terms of dollars. And if you reduce by about 10 feet of width, if it translates to a cost reduction in the range of 23 to 30 million. So we think there is a way forward where you could have $100 million type of reduction to be achievable. And still the same number of lanes, the same have shoulders, but not the full, you know, not customary width that the Rose Quarter Improvement Project is currently proposing. There's been, you know, in terms of what would be some of the cost to delays to schedule or additional schedule, what would that cost? There's about a 3% cost increase for inflation annually that needs to be accounted for. So that is our technical and cost findings. Nolan, do you want to share the resolution? And then I'm happy to take questions on any of that.
Sure. So the draft, I'm getting feedback from somebody. The draft resolution that we have is, whereas the community vision includes highway covers designed to support significant levels of community development, be it resolved that the ESC recommends the highway covers are constructed to maximize community-led development of buildings of up to 2 stories on the highway covers, or up to 5 stories on the highway covers, or development of buildings higher than 5 stories on the highway covers, consistent with the trade-offs that Kate described on the last slide. So this would be indicating a level of support for one of these levels, recognizing the various trade-offs and costs involved. So we can take questions or observations about those findings or about these resolutions.
Gina, you're muted.
And since nobody's speaking up, I will just convey that there was an interesting discussion at the HAB about building scale and development scale. And some had preferences for lower scale of development, single family houses or townhomes, something like that. So I do want to make sure that we pass that on. I think there's obviously a return on investment issue with any of these choices. And at the same time, there's also potentially more return for the community in terms of housing, whether that be ownership or rental, return on investment in terms of businesses. More businesses may be located in a building that has more square footage. So obviously there are higher costs and potentially even engineering considerations of the taller buildings. And the presumption would be that you are doing so in order to get more housing or more commercial space or more retail or whatever those uses are. But it also doesn't mean that if you designed it to have buildings up to 5 stories that you couldn't have some of the places within those covers be townhomes or be single family houses. But if you design it for the minimum, that's pretty much your cap.
So we have several questions, and so President Peterson, I'd like to take your question first because your hand was up first.
Gina, thank you. I actually have a series of questions, so maybe I should wait till last.
That is your choice. We'll come back to you. Bryson?
Yeah, so my question was just kind of around the potential savings from the adjustments to the main line. Where are these adjustments coming in? What are we shaving off? Is it just reduction in lane width? Is it reduction in lane width plus reduction in shoulders? Things like that. Basically, where does that come from?
So I think I'll jump in and just note that our scope didn't involve redesign or explorations of alternative designs of the main line of the freeway. So none of our scenarios involve the kind of trade-offs that Kate described. What we're really indicating is more of a statement of principle that the wider those spans, the more expensive it is. And so inversely, the narrower the spans, the less expensive it is. And so there's a number of ways that ODOT and its stakeholders could decide to make trade-offs with. We have not gone into detail about exactly where you would do that because it's not in the scope of our study.
Can we leave it there, Bryson?
Yeah, I think I'm good for right this second.
All right, next I had Nate. Nate, go ahead, please.
Yep, I just wanted to remind everybody that we had a good discussion that I think Nolan is kind of bringing up with the HAB and ESC included. And I think I was one of those folks who thought that given what we already have designed is more or less a buildable cap of 3 stories or below. And I think Megan mentioned, I think the north side could go up to 3-4 stories or something like that. And then the rest 2 stories. And I'm just still a little surprised by this phenomenon of thinking that housing on this cap is actually going to do something. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to get a ROI impact that I think Nolan is speaking to, because I just feel like when you start talking about housing, you really start having some winners and some losers. And same question as Bryson was asking about contractors. I probably got a longer list of questions around development and Black and brown people that actually do that in our community and that are prevalent, because I don't see them and been in development for 15 years. So at the end of the day, I feel like we should be thinking about something more transformational, and I look to people like Steve Witter when they were building the TriMet light rail through Inner Northeast, and I was a city employee. And I remember us talking about the same stuff, we're going to revitalize the area, we're going to have all this home ownership for Black and brown communities. And if he was to turn his mic on, I guarantee you he would say the same thing that we all conclude here, is that people were priced out of their own neighborhoods because they didn't have a job. They didn't have incomes to sustain themselves where they were, which is why most of us are in Gresham right now. So, again, we do a lot of talk about place, but we always do it before people. And I think what we should really start doing in this meeting, if we're going to talk about the cap, is why not have a state-of-the-art workforce training facility that honors all of our Black families that came here from the dang South to work, you know, in the shipyards, at Emmanuel Hospital, on the railroads, like all of that. To me, that would be the best measure of success we could have, because there is no loser if we're creating workforce for our people. Marlon Holmes on our ESC here, if he was here today, he would tell you why he's not here, because he had one of his students at Central Catholic get shot in the head just recently. So like, this stuff is very impassioned for me, because I'm actually really a part of this community, and I have friends and family who have been killed at the hands of gun violence. But we're talking about affordable housing, and we're talking about potentially some Black and brown people owning property. But at the end of the day, the masses are not benefiting from this stuff on a cap. Now, long term on other projects, I get it. But if we can actually build a training center for $5 billion worth of projects in our neighborhood, maybe restorative justice can really show its head by getting people a job to be able to live wherever they want in the city, not just in one tower, but all over the city. So I just say that because I'm glad we're asking the questions, but think the cost impact statement, not just on the housing and what we build, but just the jobs created with it. We got to ask that, because commercial buildings, retail businesses, how many people can we employ in barbershops and in, you know, bookshops or whatever it is? I want the biggest impact that we can have that really lives up to restorative justice. And it starts with a real high paying job. So I stopped there, and I just wanted to make sure again that I say this every meeting we have until everybody else starts to say, all right, Nate, we're leaving housing alone. We're going to do this workforce training center. So sorry, Nolan, sorry.
Yeah. No. Not only have you said it at every meeting, but you said it in our first one-on-one conversation. And I've tried to make sure we never lose sight of that workforce training center. I will say I appreciate you raising it, because one of the things we've done that we haven't maybe said as clearly as we could at the beginning of this meeting is we've moved away from programmatic assumptions for what happens on the cover. So housing comes out of my mouth sometimes, retail, commercial, even workforce training comes out of my mouth, because those are all things we heard from the community as being important and priorities that they wanted to leave flexibility for. But none of our scenarios assume one of those is happening and one of those isn't. I think what you'll hear in the next section when Olivia begins to talk about governance is that it felt important to us that there is a flexible cover and a community entity that can actually, you know, that's Black led, that can make decisions about what are those needs. And so, you know, being able to do those trade-offs of cost benefit, how many people benefit, how long do they benefit, what is the kind of long-term wealth creation that's happening, that organization, rather than our consultant team or even the ESC, that, you know, a community-led organization can help to make those evaluations. So I appreciate all the points you're making.
And then just to add, Nate, it was one of the top 10 programming elements that the community itself identified in our workshops, and you know, was reinforced on the online open house. So it, you know, your point is not lost, and I think having the context that Nolan just provided is important for ESC members to have. We're not programming the cover, because that's not our job. Our job is to create the opportunity, and the community needs to be the one to program the cover. Okay. Megan, I think you were next. And I haven't forgotten you, President Peterson. I'll be back around to you.
Gina, I see that our ESC member from ODOT, Brendan, has his hand up, so I will defer to him first, but if I'll come back with a couple of questions when he's done.
Okay, very good. Brendan, please.
Yeah, thanks, Gina, and apologies, I had to go off camera. Apparently my basement, which is the coolest part of my house, has about the better, not as good as the internet connection as where President Peterson is in the Wallace. But real quick, I feel like we're team, and I want to just assure my colleagues on the ESC, you know, a lot of things are being teed up right now for us to dig deeper into, especially on cost. That's an incredibly important, obviously, aspect for us on all of our projects that we want to be incredibly competent on. So more to come on that, and I'm going to flag for ODOT team listening. And Kate, just this quick question. So the the 3%, that's just inflation. That's not other costs that may go up due to delay. Right, that's just an inflationary measure.
Correct.
That's it. Go to President Peterson.
President Peterson, please.
Thank you, Gina. And thank you to all who have been commenting. I've been listening carefully. Kate, I just want to understand if there are any other benefits or impacts that we should know about from having a narrower main line of I-5 besides cost. And then I have some follow-up questions for ODOT.
In addition to cost savings, the other benefits are potentially less right-of-way needs to be taken. So we may not have as much of an issue of abutting the Harriet Tubman School if you're talking about a narrower right-of-way. So you have less impacts on the edges. The other thing is, we've looked at comparisons across the country, as I mentioned, of similar, basically tunnels, which is what this will be, through urban areas. And there's lots of ways to manage the operational improvements that are, again, cheaper than building out all the infrastructure. So like one thing is just to have a tow truck at the ready, if there's any backups in the tunnel, just on the side, right outside the cover, at the ready. And a lot of those type of operational improvements can be beneficial, as opposed to widening it as the maximum, that ODOT is currently proposing.
Thank you. Yeah, we increased incident management significantly on the Seattle Tunnel project with the opening, with the help of the legislature. So just Megan, I think, because I need to walk through this with you. This is a significant trade-off discussion that it's never ever had. So I'm still a little confused about the purpose of the inside shoulder. And I'd like to know what you believe the benefits of that 12-foot inside shoulder would be.
Yeah, thanks, President Peterson. I'm going to lower my hand while I'm doing this here. The benefit of the inside shoulder is twofold. It's for the safety component, similar to the outside shoulder. So there is that space for emergency responders to either get to an incident sort of within or beyond the Rose Quarter area, or for the disabled vehicles to pull out of the way. But a bigger, I'd say, policy conversation, and I think one to be had with our community and this executive steering committee as well, is the future potential for bus on shoulder. We've heard the priorities from different partners around this table to provide transit enhancements. And so is bus on shoulder one of those enhancements that continues to be of interest to this group? And if so, is preserving the space for that outside shoulder the right use for that? So I think those are all part of that, like the future kind of practical design conversations. I'm encouraged to kind of hear the different ideas coming out of the ICA team, but also need to make sure that we are doing that in a way that still meets the purpose and need of the project to improve safety and operations. And so I think those continued conversations are really important.
Thank you. Just to get my head around it further, Megan, and I don't need any, just a yes or no in terms of time, right? Or a follow-up would be helpful. So is the transit only lane or bus on shoulder in the regional transportation plan as part of our regional policy, or was it discussed at JPAC? Because it feeds into an HOV lane to the north.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. What are the inside shoulder widths to the north and south of the Rose Quarter right now?
I am such an expert at what they are in Rose Quarter that I don't know what they are exactly immediately to the north and south, but I can definitely follow up with you, President Peterson.
Thanks. I would appreciate that because I think, taking one project and putting it in context of the entire transportation system, I guess the question is, will bus on shoulder be available north and south of the Rose Quarter to actually make this investment have an ROI that works, right, on the inside shoulder? And just a question about the standards that we're applying to the Rose Quarter. Is there any intent by ODOT to apply them to North I-5 then?
So north of Rose Quarter, like with the interstate bridge replacement? Is that the reference?
No, the segment between the two.
Well, the federal standards and the state standards for shoulders are 12 feet. And so that's really the baseline that we're using for Rose Quarter. Right now, there aren't any other improvements targeted between Rose Quarter and Interstate Bridge. So at this time, no.
So we're not planning on widening north of Rose Quarter to meet that modern standard.
There aren't any plans in place right now, really just focused on Rose Quarter at this point in time. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And then just on the safety and handling of breakdowns, do we have any data that would point to the frequency of breakdowns on the stretch, especially from any type of vehicle, so we can have a conversation about that trade-off?
Yeah, we do. We absolutely have that data. I don't have it at the ready, but we can definitely, I can add that to my list of follow-ups. Okay,
thanks. And then do you know what you plan to do on the Abernathy Bridge, which is a parallel project, right, that's being advanced? Do you know what the inside shoulder width is going to be?
I don't know off the top of my head, but again, taking a note here to add that to a follow-up list.
All right, thank you. I just want to say thank you for following up on all of that. I think it's going to be really important to the Metro Council and to the ESC and HAB to know the answers to those, because we haven't had that trade-off conversation, and I think we're going to need to think about how we do that. And I appreciate the practical design conversation that will come at some point, but there are policies within design standards. And in a urban environment with a constrained right-of-way, it should be clear that that's a policy question, not a design standard alone, right? There are trade-offs that need to be publicly discussed. So will the ESC or any other group be asked to weigh in on this trade-off decision as we move through the process?
I think that's part of future ESC conversations. And I think as we kind of use the work of the ICA as the kind of a baseline to dig into those technical items and the constructability items, we can definitely look at that as it relates to the I-5 mainline design as well.
All right, thank you, much appreciated.
And Gina, I have one question. I had my hand up earlier. Do you mind if I ask it now?
You did, Megan. I will happily entertain that. We have a couple of other sections, but please.
I think it's an easy one, but I just want to clarify for the cost estimates that are provided that Kate spoke to. I want to confirm whether that relates to just the highway cover portion and sort of the main line for which the cover touches, or are those estimates for the project in full? I just want to make sure that we are making that distinction.
Kate White, you want to address that one?
Yeah, it's all in our report, but we itemize it, the section. It's not just the cover. It's sort of hard to separate the cover from the other section. So we try to do apples to apples with the cost to complete report, which includes other things besides just the cover.
Right, understood. I'm just wondering if it includes the area of, say, I-5 mainline north of the highway cover and the I-5 mainline south of the highway cover. Like, is it total project cost, or is it just the highway cover cost and then the pieces that the highway covers touch?
It's focused on the section around underneath and around the covers. You know, we can share exactly what we were measuring from what point to what point.
Okay, so the total cost doesn't cover like the 405 interchange or the 84 interchange?
No.
Okay. Thanks.
All
So
right.
I think we should
move
push.
on?
Yeah.
Okay. So Kate, I think this is you, and
Yeah, thank you. And I've also got Adrian on, who really helped lead this from Tool, so he can help back me up hopefully. But some things about mobility, and we were really focused on the surface streets and impacts in the neighborhood. So in terms of supporting restorative justice outcomes and the community's vision for the neighborhood, we really focused on a shift in design approach from an auto-focused street network, surface street network, and circulation system to really prioritizing pedestrian-oriented street scale. And we've got some images in our final report that kind of express this, and you can take a look at those. Really looking to improve placemaking and wealth creation outcomes, creating a really nice place on and around the covers, including the streets. And so making this shift in design approach, really, we're looking at a shift in how those roads that go over the covers are allocated. So not increasing the width of them, but reallocating some of the space to prioritize pedestrians, bicyclists, and streetscape amenities like the trees that you saw. You can see in the drawings. And so we're just looking at kind of minor reductions or increases on property impacts on the surface streets. So next, do we have more on mobility?
Yes, one more slide.
Yeah. So, obviously, when you're talking about reallocating some of these surface streets, the first question is what's going to be the impact on vehicle delay, getting on and off the highway at certain intersections. So we did run some initial synchro models, some traffic models to look at that. And there is some increase in vehicle delay at some intersections, but we also, in our scenarios, look at improvements to other intersections. And then there's been a lot of concern about transit routes in particular, and making sure that we're not causing undue delay with any of our designs. There needs to be more detailed analysis, but we did, we did find that it's not the delay, which we've shared with TriMet, potential delays are minimal, and that there might be some other operational improvements that could help make up for those delays, including signal timing, some dedicated transit lanes, and repurposing part of Williams for bus operations. And then we do know there'll be some design adjustments to make sure that the large truck turning movements are possible on and off the highway.
So Nolan, you want to pick it up? Do we want, what I think we should do is go through both of these next sessions, just because we're kind of running out of time. So Nolan,
the draft mobility resolution is whereas prioritizations of pedestrians, cyclists, and transit in the city street network support an equitable, sustainable, and vibrant community. ESC recommends a shift in design approach on surface streets, which increases the amount of right-of-way dedicated to pedestrians, bicyclists, and streetscape amenities, and reduces the space dedicated to automobiles by using the same right-of-way proposed in the 20% design and without increasing any property impacts. ESC recommends further exploration of transit prioritization strategies, including signal timing, dedicated transit lanes, particularly in the Williams-Vancouver corridor. And be it resolved that ESC recommends that the Green Loop alignment be located on Weidler and or Broadway to bring pedestrians and cyclists to the center of the district. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank TriMet for a lot of thoughtful contributions to some of these transit prioritization strategies. We are going to roll through the environmental assessment findings and their resolutions so that we can discuss those as a group. We are a little bit behind schedule, and I think that may help us a little bit. So back to Kate.
So yeah, real quick on the EA, because I know there's a lot of concern about it, to our earlier conversation back and forth with Nate. The design elements in scenario 4 and 5 would require additional technical studies and a higher level of engineering than we were able to complete within our scope. But it's not calling for a new EIS. It's not calling for a new EA. It's narrow technical studies. And we think these would take about 14 to 24 months. The ICA process, we believe, yielded some cover design scenarios that provide substantive benefits to the historic Albina community. And if incorporated, these design refinements would be subject to FHWA rules. They would have to review those. If we believe there's a path forward, a very potentially promising path forward with this whole project, that if we could expand the definition, the project description of the Rose Quarter Improvement Project to more explicitly include restorative justice, then there's a way for the FHWA to move forward maybe even quicker with scenarios 4 and 5 to if they with those restorative justice goals as part of the project description. And it could demonstrate, there's more support from local government representatives, community stakeholders. So that could make up for some of that, additional time that I mentioned at the top with the scenarios 4 and 5. And finally, again, we don't believe that there would need to be an alteration to the FONSI or the EA. It would not open up a whole new EIS. Just to be very clear on that, and that there's potential for the scenarios 4 and 5 to be consistent with the new executive orders that are coming out of Federal Highway Administration right now, focused on environmental justice.
So Nolan, if you'll do the resolutions, then we'll go back to the mobility one, because I have several people with questions. So.
Sure. With apologies for so much text on this slide, whereas scenario 5 scored highest in the development assessment framework and its ability to serve community vision and restorative justice criteria, it is therefore appropriate to move all scenario 5 design elements C, F, and G into the RQIP process to secure federal and state funding. Be it resolved that the environmental reevaluation be implemented as follows. RQIP project description should be expanded to acknowledge that restorative justice is a primary project goal for community development benefits and objectives. Convey to FHWA potential cover design refinements consistent with the expanded RQIP project description that have support from local government representatives, stakeholders, and the community. Coordinate with FHWA to determine the level of environmental documentation necessary for a reevaluation, and initiate, complete, and submit revised environmental documentation inclusive of supporting technical studies to support the reevaluation process, advocating for a continued finding of no significant impact. We can jump back and forth between mobility and environmental, but we thought we would save a little bit of time by consolidating the conversation since we do have one more resolution to get through on governance before we wrap up around 5:20.
So let's go back up to the mobility. I had two comments, two hands up. Jana, your hand was up on this. And so I'd like to, if you've got a question or comment, we'd like to hear it.
I do, thank you. In some of the discussions when you're presenting these different options, and particularly when you're talking about moving the ramps, we talked about, you've made the statement that they would accommodate heavy trucks. I guess I'm curious to know the length and the slope of some of these exits, because I've heard from others that the turning radius and the slope would create some potentially dangerous situations. And I'm also curious to know whether or not what kind of equipment you've considered if you're playing around with those ramps. What did you consider for equipment that would move through that region? So.
Sure. I can have maybe Adrian jump in as well to help me out. I know we looked at the largest trucks that go through there, And the curves and the slopes are well within standard. There's no, we did, fatal flaws, make sure that we're, not causing any, or proposing any type of dangerous situation. So I don't know, Adrian, if there's anything to add in terms of.
No, I think that's a good summary. We looked at the largest trucks. I think the only design challenge, if you like, that we're addressing is the southbound off-ramp. When we move the southbound off-ramp further south, that is a tight turn near the Madrona there, and so we have some details in the cover report about how we're addressing that tight turn, if you like. But it is possible to make, so it is accommodated.
I do think there are triples that run through that area. Is that what you've considered?
Yeah, it's a WB 67.
That's just a standard 5-axle 80,000 pound. You didn't look at triples then. So, okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Holt, quickly, did you have something?
2 comments. One, in relationship to the green loop, that is not within the scope of the ESC. That is a city project. And so the ESC would not be weighing in on the green loop. And then secondly, in relationship to the next one, restorative justice is unless I'm misinterpreting the next resolution, restorative justice is a part of the values that have already been identified within the ESC. So don't think there's a real need to go back on that, but to make sure that the path forward is reflective of it. So I wanted to highlight those 2 things.
All right, thank you for that input. We will register it. Bryson.
Yeah, I guess it kind of goes with Dr. Holt's last bit, but in a slightly different direction. I just wanted to clarify, because it sounds like what we'd be doing on including the restorative justice into the project description is effectively adjusting the application and the projects to make it less of a change to include some of these changes for 4 and 5. And I'm kind of curious as to whether that inclusion you think is a necessary component to get 4 and 5 into that 14 to 24 month range, or whether it's a component that you think might, given that range that you've been looking at, adding that component will make it easier and will make it potentially even shorter than what you're thinking of.
Kate, I think that's on you.
Thank you, Bryson. I appreciate the question. So I said right at the beginning with the context that, we need to get real about the risks that the Rose Quarter Improvement Project as currently proposed is facing, and it's not reflected in the current schedule. So there's major political risks with the current proposal when you don't have the city on board, you don't have a lot of the community on board. And so when we're talking about schedule risk, we need to consider what the current proposed project is facing in terms of schedule risk. So what we're saying here is that we think there may be a path forward with scenarios 4 and 5 that would get more of the community on board and the city potentially on board, the city of Portland. And if you can demonstrate that kind of consensus, then you may be able to save time and be able to realistically move forward with the Rose Quarter Improvement Project, including the covers. And so, yes, there needs to be time for technical studies, to really do all the engineering and studies, traffic studies that need, and that we estimate that would be 14 to 24 months to complete those for scenarios 4 and 5. But if we started today, then, ODOT already has built into their schedule through the end of the year, 6 months or more to do some reevaluation, EA environmental reevaluation. So it could overlap with these studies. So that would potentially reduce the time. So it would be on the lower end of those months.
Sorry, I have to interject just real quickly. I hate to interrupt, but it's something that I had communicated that I would do in terms of when communication is not necessarily just communication. So Kate, when you said there isn't a lot of community on board, that's not an accurate assessment. That's an assessment or perspective. But to make a determination on that is not an accurate way to represent that. So I really want you to be careful in how those things get represented. Thank you.
And so I think let me rephrase my question. I think we kind of went off on a tangent a little bit. I was just asking about the component of changing the project description and whether or not you think that's a requirement to get you where you're doing, or whether that enhances kind of what you've already.
I think, Kate, we need to explain how that relates to a shortened time frame for the reevaluation. That's really what I think Bryson is getting at, and why we think that those two things are related. So,
sure. So the current Federal Highway Administration, the current US DOT is very, very focused on social, racial, and environmental justice. This executive order I mentioned here is just one piece, but everything that's coming out of those offices, if you're following anything, it's very, very focused on these issues. And which is, very refreshing for a lot of us. And so we believe that if we could make the case that our refined Rose Quarter Improvement Project, namely scenarios 4 and 5, were advancing restorative justice, and that also that the purpose, or not officially the purpose and need, because that's a specific thing in the environmental, but if the project description and the overall goals of the project were expressed to the federal government at this time, this unique moment in time, expressed as a key component of the Rose Quarter Improvement Project, we think there is really a window, a policy window that's open right now, that was a year ago, where we could make the case and we could move things forward, and that focusing on those restorative justice components of the Rose Quarter Improvement Project, namely the cover and the better, improved design for the community outcomes on the covers, then we think it would really help with the timing. It would reduce risk of delay. Those technical studies would take time, but it wouldn't. We feel like it may not end up being less time than if we don't take that path.
So what I would like to do, Bryson, if it's all right with you, is I'd like for us to at least get the last, our governance resolution in the room, and then we can, whatever time we have left, we can take some additional comments. I know there were a couple of people that wanted to make comments, and so please, let's go through the governance findings and the resolution, and then we can talk about, I want to get back to Julia relative to the environmental, and let her have her say as well. All right.
Thanks, Gina, and nice to be with you all. Just as a reminder, I'm Olivia Moss with HR&A Advisors, leading the governance and finance work stream within the ICA work. So the key findings coming out of our governance assessment are that linking the creation of the highway covers to restorative justice outcomes requires a governance structure that establishes a clear leadership role for community stakeholders in determining the future of the highway covers in the neighborhood more broadly. I really was, I really appreciated Nate McCoy's earlier statements about sort of really seeking to understand how value would be delivered and how restorative justice would be delivered to this community. And we have observed that that question hinges on things beyond the actual construction of, beyond the highway widening and the highway project, and then beyond even the construction of the highway covers. They should be as flexible as possible, but allow for, as they move forward, there also needs to be a structure that allows for the community to really chart its own course for development, both on the highway covers and of the surrounding neighborhood. And that really requires a both development plan and I think an economic development plan that is generated by the community and by community stakeholders to benefit the community. Control of future development on the highway covers and remnant lands made available after the Rose Quarter improvement project's construction is a priority for the community that has been most impacted by the original construction of I-5 through the Rose Quarter. So we've talked quite a bit about the need for there to be a focus on the community organization and community stakeholders who are leading the development of the plans for development on the highway covers and remnant lands and the surrounding neighborhood, to be focused on the Black community, the historic Albina community, and those who were most impacted by original construction of I-5. And then under the right conditions, future development on the highway covers really could deliver on community priorities and help community stakeholders achieve their goals. And some of those conditions include what we've been talking about, right? Which is that the community is able to guide its own process for coming up with a development plan for the highway covers, that they are involved in and consulted on decisions about how the highway covers are delivered, that they benefit from the delivery, but also that they really have ownership over the resulting development rights as possible, the resulting land, and I use the words in this case, ownership and control interchangeably, and that they're able to really steward forward development that helps to deliver on those priorities, some of which we've identified in this process. And certainly, because this is a diverse, multifaceted community, there will be others in the future. I'll turn it over to Nolan to talk through our resolutions or draft resolutions here.
And again, a slide with a lot of words on it, so apologies in advance, but whereas accomplishing the OTC, ESC, and other stakeholders' shared goal of delivering restorative justice through creation of highway covers as part of the Rose Quarter Improvement Project requires the creation of a governance strategy that is focused on championing the broad interests of surrounding community stakeholders. The ESC recommends that an advisory committee be appointed by the governor to determine the selection process and criteria for forming a new governing entity. This advisory committee should consist of trusted representatives from the Black and historic Albina community who have connections to the community and experience required to understand how a new governing entity may function and what is required of this entity. Also, that the ESC recommends the development rights on the highway cover and the land made available for disposition by the Rose Quarter Improvement Project to be conveyed to the new governing entity for a nominal fee by ODOT. ODOT should determine the appropriate legal mechanism to enable this transaction, which will support project stakeholders' restorative justice goals by providing control of land to a community-focused Black-led governing entity.
All right, Bryson, I see you have your hand up, so let me take, and then Brendan, if you've got questions or comments on the governance stuff. And then I just want to leave a little bit of time to go back and pick up Julia and let her comment on, I know she had some issues around the environmental. So please.
Yeah, so I think, piggybacking off of what Nate was talking about earlier with the workforce training, and not just for the trades, but for various types of businesses. I mean, I know I spent a bunch of time working to try to get more Black people in the legal community in Oregon. I know people are doing it in the startup community. I know it's being done in various different industries and trades throughout the Portland economy. And in thinking about kind of how we want the desire to have things like that, programming like that, and items like that be part of the cover development. I mean, having a governance structure and having a committed strategy that this would be the first step on is really the key to making those things happen. I mean, if we don't have a way to get the land to the community in community controlled cheaply, then it's going to be more difficult to provide community-based services. And if we don't have a group that's sort of fielding and then laying out the values that we want on this development and how the development can be a benefit to the community, then it's going to be hard to express our values through that development because the people doing it won't necessarily know what those values are. And so I would highlight this as one of the key components of making these caps worthwhile as far as a community wealth creation component of the project.
Thank you. Brendan, and to the degree that you guys can help us, help us refine these so that they really feel like they're going to work for you and be a baseline for you moving forward, that's going to be, or ask questions about them, that's going to be the most helpful for us at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Gina, and I'll be as succinct as possible. And to that exact end, just on I guess I have one quick question, Olivia. And as far as remnant lands, one of the things I think and I've learned so much through this process, again, thank you, is the actual cover, like the actual cover land on top of the freeway, that kind of the federal precedent around this, what you've observed is that part in itself, that piece of land that's just, again, right on top of the interstate, can be leased, but can't be, the ownership of that cannot be transferred. But there's going to be plenty of other opportunities that have been identified, obviously, through that process. But I just wanted to confirm that piece with you, Olivia. I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I'll just be really brief. Our understanding is that structure the ownership of that structure could not be transferred. You could do any number of agreements to free up the development rights for community-focused development, and even allow for ownership products, meaning for sale housing, commercial condos, et cetera, on it,
yep.
In addition to ownership of the remnant land.
Yeah, thanks. I just, as we're moving forward with stuff, I thought that was an important note. Thanks, Olivia. And then the other one, just on.
Go ahead, Brendan. I'm sorry,
Gina. Just one other quick comment, and this is just on as we move forward. Appreciate this recommendation of the advisory committee, and the having trusted representatives from the Black and Historic Albina community, and I think my colleagues would probably agree. We already have a good set of them within the Historic Albina Advisory Board. So as we move forward, I think this is some great language to start with. I think I'd be looking to others to see if they agree with me there that the HAB would be a good group to identify here as we move forward in resolutions such as this. So those are my comments, Gina. I want to make sure we have time to get over to Julia. So thanks.
Thank you. Julia, can I get you back on stage since I deferred you earlier and told you would have an opportunity to ask your questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, and I appreciate you giving me the right moment to raise this. And as everybody knows, I've often talked about the air quality and the impact that has on the students at Harriet Tubman. And so because this would also impact potentially air quality, I asked the question, I'm going to just ask Charles if maybe you could summarize the answers to the questions that I gave just to get it on the record and have it be part of this discussion. My question that I posed is, as part of this process, did the team look at the air quality implications for each of the CAP scenarios and the impact that the CAP scenario would have on the student, youth, or children who go to Tubman and who live in the neighborhood? And I got a response, but I'm wondering, Charles, if you or somebody on the team could just in the public meeting put it on the record.
Okay.
As quickly as possible, Charles, so we'll have at least a couple minutes to wrap up.
I'm just trying to find what I sent her, because I did send her an email that we could daylight as well. And but essentially your two questions were well, what
questions were, did you look at air quality as a criteria in any of these scenarios? And then second, if you did, how would, generally these scenarios impact air quality?
But we have an appendix B, which I note is our conceptual design assumption summary. And in that assumption summary, we outlined best practices at this scale at this phase of the development, in which you could understand how to avoid or understand what uses would want to avoid being near freeways. If you were planning, say, a school, or you were planning a sensitive use, there are national guidelines for assigning dimensions in a planning process. So we use those and made those a part of our design criteria in designing, which we use to assess the different scenarios. One, the concept one, which has the ramp terminals in the middle of the highway cover, has the potential to possibly increase exposure to noise and air quality, different than concept 4 and 5, because they have continuous ramps. They have continuous covers, and they push the ramps to the south. So when you have a continuous cover, you really decrease the possibility for exposure to air and noise exposure. So that's the difference between those two options or those two concepts using that criteria.
Great, thank you very, very much. And as I said, I'd just like to have that be part of our overall public record. And thank you for answering the question on a relatively short turnaround time.
So we are out of time. Unfortunately, there's never enough time to really get to, everything that people are concerned about or to hear everybody's comments. I want to throw the baton to Nolan and let him talk about how we're going to wrap this up and make sure that what the next steps are for our process and how you can help us wrap this up. So Nolan, do you want to?
Thanks, Gina. So you've all received the CAP report. It has a lot of the content we've tried to summarize very quickly this evening. And if you have other comments that you either weren't able to say tonight or that you come up with upon further reflection of the report, please get those to us by July 7th, which is when we're trying to collect other stakeholder feedback from the partner agencies and others, so that we can begin to finally sort of put a bow on that report. And then, we'll continue to be available for technical and other questions that you may have as you dive through that report, and continue to be a resource. So really appreciate all of your thoughtful questions and comments this evening.
So we want to thank you all. As always, we apologize that we never have enough time, but your comments are always insightful and helpful and stimulate us to refine what we need to do. It's been a quick process. We're grateful for the relationship and the interaction we've been able to have with you, and that you've allowed us to, seize your agenda on many instances over the last 6 months. So thank you very much. And we look forward to getting your feedback on the 7th and then getting our final report wrapped up this month or next month, excuse me. Yes, this month's almost over. So with that,
Yeah.
Bishop Holt, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you very much. We're certainly at the end of June. Thanks for the work tonight. We appreciate the effort and the energy. If we could have a shared slide with PowerPoint for our meeting. Thank you, ICA team. Appreciate your work. Excellent, that one right there. The ESC 6-month look ahead. These are the next steps. These are actually going to encapsulate the items in front of us: direction on highway cover, scenario recommendation, direction on the southbound realignment, design option, which means thinking through it, making determinations about which way it will go, direction on local street solutions, feedback on early work packages to shape the project performance measures, and then shape the 30% design package. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of work that's in front of the Executive Steering Committee related to not only this discussion, but then the auxiliary kinds of things, parallel things that are running through it. Are there any comments or questions from either ODOT staff or ESC that needs to weigh in here? Did I miss anything? Excellent. Well, if we can go back to the slide deck, please. We'll talk about our next steps, or actually I can just cover it here. Our next steps, as the direction for the OTC has been postponed, or I should say the recommendation to the OTC has been postponed. It is now the effort to coordinate. Our hope is 3 meetings between the Executive Steering Committee and the Historic Albana Advisory Board between now and September 2nd. And so Executive Steering Committee, you can anticipate hearing from me or someone's, either Erica or someone on the team, trying to identify dates as soon as we possibly can. I know that it is close, but our effort is to be as thorough as possible and create at least 2.5-hour, possibly 3-hour touch points, 3 of them, 3 touch points between now and September to work through the information that's been presented to come to a place of agreed upon recommendation so that what gets presented to the OTC comes from a place of collaboration and comprehension. Any question or comment from the ESC related to that? Okay. Chair Simpson, any closing comments, sir?
Just looking forward to those next steps with the engagement of the other bodies, really the community members. I think it's really important that, I think I've kind of insinuated this before, that most of the folks that are working in this, and we get very technical here, someone's either being paid as a consultant or paid by the work that they do on the day-to-day basis to be involved in this. And I feel like I would be guilty if I didn't acknowledge the role and time investment that goes into the community folks who aren't getting compensated for anything, from the COAC to the HAB. And I really do feel like it's becoming, at that point, for me, it only feels right that these are the people who probably deserve to be compensated. I don't know how, I don't know what that entails, but given the fact that they're sacrificing a lot of their time, and I think for them, this is more of a simplified process as opposed to the technicalities that come out of these types of conversations are going to be more helpful for them. But more importantly, their sweat, their blood, their tears, their energy, their sweat equity that goes into all this, I think is not being heavily valued to me personally. And right now, I understand that there are a lot of agencies right now that are compensating individuals to participate in community workshops and stakeholder outreach processes. And I'm going to leave that with Brendan and Megan to wrestle with, because I do believe as we get further down the line here, I would hate to continue to demand so much of their time and not compensate them adequately. And to be honest, that is restorative justice. And we really should be acknowledging the time that these folks put in. And one point of clarification, President Peterson, I wasn't referring to her comments as a form of litigation. I was referring to the conversation that Bryson and Amber were having. I felt like it was more being pushed into getting a specific answer out of contracting numbers, but I think there's a lot of legalities that go into that, similar to the legalities and the questions that are going to come out of the real estate and the development from above the cap, and a lot of the things that are coming out of these proposals and findings from the ICA team. So I think it's safe for us to stay away from the legalities, because I don't think we can specifically target any particular group. And unfortunately, those are some of the things and institutions that have set up to support the reason why we're even here today talking about restorative justice. So I would leave that to those levels of decision makers and allow us to, I think, focus on the technicalities, but allow more space and opportunity for those community bodies and individuals who are spending a lot of their time and not being compensated for it. So thank you, Dr. Holt.
Thank you. I do see Bryson's hand. Bryson, very quickly, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly, make sure people didn't get the wrong idea of what I was trying to do with my questions. I just wanted to see what we already knew and how that broke down, so we can make sure we as the ESC knew all the things that ODOT already knew on that particular topic. And I do also, since I've got the mic, want to second Alondo's call for looking at compensation for those community members on the other groups that are volunteering their time and not part of agencies and such. They're cutting out of their normal day to be here, whereas most of us on this group, we've got good cushy jobs to cover our time here. So
thanks, Bryson. Thanks everybody for your work tonight. I appreciate the effort, and please do your best to stay safe and cool during our wave of heat. Until we reconnect, take care of yourselves, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.